You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello, I'm Paul Segura, aerospace engineer, 35 plus years of experience in the aerospace industry, and also an aerospace historian as well for a number of decades as well. So,
hello, I'm Robert Nicastro. I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at Villanova University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My theological interests are in astrotheology, transhumanism, posthumanism, the thought of Teilhard de Chardin, and we look forward to having this conversation this evening on Apollo 8 and the spiritual and theological implications of those discoveries and others to come. My interests are principally in the theological questions. Right now I'm working on Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and he definitely, his theology engages questions of astrotheology. And so I've also read some Karl Rahner, and I know he too has engaged those questions. I follow Ted Peters' work in California, who is engaged in the Institute for Natural Sciences and Religion. He's also on my dissertation committee. So I do have some familiarity with these questions.
Okay, great. So my background is I'm an aerospace engineer. I've been working in aerospace for over 35 years, mostly on the aviation side, but I have touched some of the space side of aerospace as well. In addition to that, I have a very strong interest in aviation history and in aerospace history as well, and have done some work and activities in that arena also with different historical organizations through the years. So I have also, let's say, within the church, I've been quite probably the biggest ministry that I've done the most time is RCIA. So I've been involved with that for 25 plus years, either as a catechist or initially as a sponsor, as a catechist, working at the archdiocesan level as well, helping with promoting the RCIA and ensuring that it's being implemented in the spirit of which the council had intended RCIA to be implemented also. And I've always had a very strong interest in terms of the unity between the faith and with science, faith and reason. And which is one reason when Sheila had asked if I may be interested in participating in the talk for iTest. Let's say I've been an iTest member for a number of years now, and have attended quite a number of the webinars. But I've always thought that the story of the Apollo 10 mission to the moon has a very strong providential element to it that I think the general population probably just is not aware of at all. And when it comes to, I'll say the Apollo moon missions in general, most people, if they know of it, would think of Apollo 11, which is the first moon landing that took place. You know, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of that just a few years ago, obviously. So I think that kind of takes all of the glory of the entire program. But obviously there's a lot that had to take place prior to the moon landing itself. And the Apollo 8 mission which is the subject of the talk, from a technical perspective and from an Apollo project programmatic perspective, was a very important step to the eventual moon landing, to the point where there are quite a number of participants in the Apollo program who think that it may be equal to the Apollo 11 mission in terms of its importance. Some even think that perhaps it may be more important in terms of the role that it played. So purely from a program and a scientific perspective, an engineering perspective, in the way that the whole moon landing program unfolded, it's a very compelling story for that reason alone. But there's, I'll say, elements of the faith, elements of religion, elements of I'll say of grace, the touch of God, that took place and how that mission unfolded, that I think is every bit of an important piece of that story. And the Apollo 8 mission is not nearly as well known, I'll say, in general, as the Apollo 11 mission was. So just explaining technically what it is, I think is an important story. But then recognizing its significance beyond just the moon landing program, beyond just its scientific contributions to the space program and space exploration, and its impact from a more human perspective and from more a faith perspective. I think it's a story that if more people were aware of it and knew it, would have a better appreciation and perhaps be touched by the story as well, in perhaps their own way. So, no, I talked it over with Sheila, and she felt that this would be a good topic. And then Robert, when it was suggested that perhaps you may be a part of this, I was intrigued, especially in terms of the element of potential life beyond the Earth. In my travels in aerospace and in terms of some of the historical activities that I've been involved in, I have heard stories dealing with events that took place during the Apollo program, where there were some unexplained activity that took place, some unexplained encounters that took place on some Apollo missions. I'm not near as familiar with these stories. I've just heard them, and I've talked to folks who are much more familiar with that whole side of it, much more familiar with the space program at that time, and know several of the astronauts personally that have told me some of these stories. That again, how much can be validated? It's tough to kind of nail that down. But if you do Google some of this, you will see you will see some stories that are out there that have been written about it, and you will see some videos of some television interviews that have been made with some of these astronauts, where they do talk about these occurrences that took place. So I think it was toward the last, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 years of Pope Benedict's time as Pope. He either wrote a letter or at least released something in terms of a recognition that we shouldn't be closed to the fact that there's possible intelligent life beyond the earth, and such openness to such a possibility is certainly in the spirit of the faith and of what we believe. So again, I'm not a big expert on any of this, and I think that topic of encounters that at least, I want to say at least 2 Apollo missions had with something unexplained, I think would form a great possible future topic as well to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's intriguing about what you're saying is, and Teilhard de Chardin would be very keen on this point, that science and religion, or science and faith, form 2 ways of knowing the one world as comprehensively and as coherently as possible. And I think Benedict and others would certainly say, if one looks at the scripture in its entirety, the Christian scriptures and the Hebrew scriptures, one sees neither evidence that confirms nor denies the existence of life on other planets, an exotheology, they would call it.
Huh.
So I and others would be more of a proponent of a theology of nature, especially as focused on the incarnation. What about this revelation of God, especially the revelation of a God of infinite mystery? And you dropped the word grace, Paul, which I think was very apt. Infinite mystery of self-communicating God's infinite presence. I don't think that could possibly be exhausted on just one planet. So it opens up the potential of the infinite mystery of God being open to all life forms, especially as we happen upon more evidence of microbial life, perhaps in other solar systems, etc. So, I think you're absolutely correct. These conversations, especially as they intersect, really have the potential to bear much fruit and hopefully take us into a future that could be one of collaboration, not only between science and religion, but also as we seek to communicate with that possibility of life on other planets.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot there. There's a sense, and I think it might have been on one of the early Mercury missions. So Mercury was the initial space program, which design was to launch an astronaut into space, just get an astronaut into space, right? And I believe it was John Glenn's mission, which was the first mission to orbit the Earth. There were 2 missions prior that were suborbital, reach space and then return to Earth. Where John Glenn on this orbital mission did experience some sort of activity, what he called fireflies of some sort that he saw outside of the spacecraft. Once that was known, there was a lot of speculation of maybe this was something that he saw during reentry, when the spacecraft starts encountering the Earth's atmosphere, and then due to aerodynamic friction, right? There's heat and light and all kinds of different colors that can appear, but there was a discussion that this happened before the reentry phase of the mission. So that is something that's of course open, and I don't think that necessarily we have all of the full story behind that, but yet the fact that just about right away Okay, when these missions were going up into space, there was already some sort of encounter of something, right? Whether it's alive or not, right? Whether it's intelligent or not, there was an encounter with an unexplained phenomenon that took place. And again, I'm not near at the depth of this part of the history of what happened, but there are apparently quite a number of similar reports of things that just are not explained. Whether it's something like John Glenn saw, or if it's something that more looked like it was some sort of designed or manufactured type of object potentially, and change directions or traveling at certain speeds or whatever it happened to be, and it just appeared to be not necessarily natural. What was it? Was it a meteorite? Was it was it a star or something else? Was it a comet? Things of that nature. And those things apparently in the minds of the astronauts or others, that they may have been talking to, had said, well, it wasn't really those things. So what is it, right? So I think whether you want to use the word evidence, okay, it's not a one-off story, right? Of this happened one time with one astronaut on one mission. There are other things, right, that have happened. So, in my perspective, it calls for further reflection, further investigation, for further taking into prayer, for us to really see, what is the Lord trying to show us here, and what direction, is He really wanting us to go? So I think there's a lot there, and I'm this is really the first I've known that there's been activity looking at this from a theological perspective. I think that's wonderful, and I'm very interested in learning a whole lot more about that, and seeing what the fruits are thus far, and where it's going in the future.
And there's certainly not enough, Paul, being done on this yet. It's a relatively recent field, astrotheology, and it's based on the science of astrobiology. And there's the hope that there could be a mutual interactive exchange of knowledge. And what is meant by that is simply this, that science cannot be completely dogmatic. It can impose predetermined worldviews on discovery that colors discovery, rather than allow it to be as truly empirical and objective finding as possible. And at the same time, theology has to be completely open to scientific discoveries, to test the validity of faith claims in light of those discoveries, presuming, of course, they are as open and honest as possible, and create a more coherent philosophical conversation between that science, the discoveries of science, and that new theological insights that can arise, and then together ask each other the question, as dialogically as possible, how can we continue to direct this conversation to something that continues to bring about a greater fusion of horizons, but also bring about greater insights that can take us beyond the problems of today, not only in our own existence, but hopefully by the discovery of other existences, help solve problems that perhaps aren't even yet discoverable at present. In other words, if we can think large enough together as a scientific body and a theological body to conceive of life on other planets and what that might mean for us, perhaps then we could utilize those insights to tackle well the present problems that we're dealing with and prepare for future problems that may even be more precarious than the ones at present. So there's this, we would hope, ongoing dialogue that's already beginning, but not yet fully deepened and perhaps never will be. And I guess this brings me back to a question for you, given your expertise. I'm very interested in this, and then we could go into the question of grace if you wish. Do you suppose we have a common language or method to communicate with another form of life, presumably intelligent life, if we were to come upon it?
Well, that is a very good question, and I'll say that the first thing that pops in my mind, Robert, speaking of grace, is I'll say mathematics. Obviously, creation is intelligible, and that intelligibility is greatly demonstrated by mathematics, and mathematics is such a fundamental reality of creation that is true throughout all of creation. When I was still in school and in engineering school as well, obviously, math is very important for learning science and learning engineering. I'll have to admit that math was not one of my favorite courses. It was the physics and the science that I really loved. But I viewed math, as an important course, obviously, set of course is, because mathematics is the language of science and the language of how different scientific disciplines can relate to each other, because mathematics operates the same regardless of what the discipline happens to be. So if we take that thought and we extrapolate that to say, well, if all of humanity uses mathematics, which it does, okay, in the same way, and we all interpret it, okay, at least in theory, we interpret it the same way, 1 + 1 = 2 is true, regardless of what part of the globe you're on, what language you speak, right, and what your field of study happens to be, that would also be true beyond humanity. Okay, beyond the earth, obviously, it's true of all of physical creation, right? So if we are able to travel to the edge of the universe, and we do find life there, okay, and if we assume for this discussion that life is intelligent, okay, I would think that in some way, okay, that other form of life would have to have some level of understanding of mathematics. Otherwise, that other form of life would not have the means to understand, okay, the universe that they're perceiving from their perspective, and to somehow explain it, and to somehow therefore to leverage it, okay, to learn more deeply what it is, and to create, okay, items to benefit them if they had the technology to do that. So regardless of what they would call it, okay, the description that mathematics gives us of the physical universe has to be something that they would have to understand at some level. So that would be my first guess on that one.
And I love the language of mathematics. And you didn't say this, but it was implicit in your response. Mathematics is essentially the language of relationship.
Yes.
It describes relationship between and among variables. And even at the quantum level of reality, we know it is mathematics that drives, illustrates it. And if we believe, at least in our Christian tradition, that our God is the God of relationships, it's from the most fundamental level of reality all the way to the human level of reality and to a cosmic level of reality, a description of relationships. So maybe what you're saying, Paul, and if it is what you're saying in a different way, I completely agree that relationship is the basis for our communication, and that is what's universal.
Yes. What you're saying reminds me of when my two daughters were still in early grade school. I was watching a documentary on PBS about mathematics, and within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that documentary, they came in, and they weren't going to watch it, but they were asking what I was watching. As I was there, here's this show about mathematics, and the narrator asked the question: was mathematics invented, or was it discovered? Mm-hmm. So, I muted the TV, and I think my older daughter at the time might have been in maybe 4th grade or so, and her younger sister was in 3rd grade at the time. And they asked them, so, gee, what do you think about that? Do you think math was invented by somebody eons ago, or was it something that we just discovered? It was already there. It was just discovered. They thought about it for about 20 seconds or so, and they both said discovered, and which is really the right answer, right? We didn't invent, right? We as humans didn't invent this thing called mathematics, right? And I think in a way, even at their young ages, they had a sense of that, and so I think that's true, because again, whatever these life forms are that are out there, if they're out there, then they would have to know this also. So yes, what a way to establish, a means to relate, okay, to these other life forms is to touch upon something that's so fundamental that we know deeply that it's there. Mm-hmm. It's just trying to find a way for us to articulate it, right, in a way that they would understand.
Right, and this goes back to a question you raised before we went down this road, and I'm glad we did. What could this, if we were to happen upon extraterrestrial intelligent life, what would be the grace moment of that? What would be the teaching moment that we could take away? And perhaps, and I'm going to throw this out, and you tell me what you think, perhaps it's learning a new and or greater way to relate. Perhaps by learning the new customs, the new ways of life, the different, perhaps more sophisticated technological advancements, how we could live better ourselves, and perhaps learn the divine mystery a little bit more explicit and clearer.
I completely agree. And I think, historically speaking, it's as perfectly in alignment with that. Obviously, in history, when human beings were heading out and discovering other human beings that were completely unknown to them at the time, what you just described is what eventually unfolded, perhaps in different ways, but customs may have been different, because of perhaps where this other group of people lived, right? When the European Western European nations were first striking out on the oceans, right? And the entire North American continent was something that was unknown, or North and South American continents were unknown to them, and they happened upon it, right? That whole discovery of, hey, these are people on both sides, right? These are people that we have not encountered yet. There were those things, fundamental things, right? That those two different peoples found that, yes, hey, we can relate to, hey, they grow food, we grow food, right? They have a means of measuring items and things and quantities and things like that. And I would guess that it would be the same thing, if we go out there and at some point in history and future history, we at the edge of the galaxy, we encounter some intelligent life. I would think that we would, again, there would be some similarities, and we would discover that, right, and speak to that, of which I think the mathematics is that key. So those kinds of discoveries, right, it's just like when two people first meet each other, right, and you discover, oh, wait a minute, hey, I've got this in common, or I've got that same view. Wow. Let's see, these other life forms, they obviously can count, they obviously can measure, right? And they can obviously, they can use the principles of mathematics, especially if they're, they have a level of advanced society or civilization or technology. It speaks to that they've had to have harnessed that, because the physics is all the same. The chemistry is all the same. The biology, for the most part, fundamentally, is the same principles, right, that take place. And mathematics, again, is the language that describes all of those things. So I think that would be very true.
And just the discovery itself, or to be in search of something unknown until we know it, takes an incredible drive of self-transcendence, which I think could also be argued that that's part of the God quest. That
yes.
Seeking out more life, more being, more truth, and continuing on with the discovery and with the search when the results aren't immediate is a fundamental drive for transcendence that requires an enormous amount of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And even the great 20th century theologian Paul Tillich would say that even if you're not religious, there is still an element of faith. Even in science, you are seeking to prove a hypothesis that you're deeply convinced by. You might not be certain by it, but you're convinced by the drive to discover. And so you're driven by an ultimate concern that can't be seen, but that continues to pull you onward. And so by natural extrapolation, we could say discovery of other life forms too, continue to do that.
Absolutely. I like what you're speaking about in terms of faith from that scientific perspective. When I was a young engineer many years ago, fresh out of college, and I was working in my first assignment, and was working on the design, and designed it, and went out to the shop floor to test out this design, and something didn't work, right? Even though the numbers, I went back and checked the numbers, okay, make sure there wasn't a mistake with the numbers were all right, okay, and saying that this should work. If this thing isn't fitting correctly, there's an interference in here. It's not going in, but yet by I look at the model in the computer and it says that it should. And my lead engineer at the time, I'll never forget, it's a huge lesson for me. And at the time, it was a big engineering lesson, but later on, as I got older, it became a philosophical and a faith lesson as well. But at the time, it was just an engineering lesson. He said, well, Paul, engineering is more of an art than it is of a science. Mm-hmm. And sometimes things happen where you're experiencing where the numbers say it should work and it doesn't, and we just don't know why. And there are other times when the numbers say it shouldn't work and it does. And we don't have the time to sit down and analyze this to the nth degree to find out, well, why is it working even though the numbers say it won't? If it's working, we accept it. We have faith in the fact that it's working. Okay. And we go on. And as my career unfolded over the years, that's happened numerous times. And it's really taught me. And as my faith life had deepened through the years, it was really just a grace for me to understand that our ability, we as humans, our ability to understand and harness the scientific principles, the engineering principles, to harness the mathematics, we can only do that so far from our perspective. And to me, that's where now we're touching that grace, okay, that is present. Okay, God is present in His creatures and in His creation at all aspects, right? The existence would not occur, right, without the Lord. So, and to me, these were times, right? We were just getting a little bit of insight into that it's our limited view of trying to use these tools of mathematics and engineering mechanics and these things, and yet it's beyond that at times, and we can sense that. So that really, I think, is a great word, faith, because I know that sometimes there are those who don't necessarily have faith, and there can sometimes be a struggle with trying to close that gap purely with the numbers, and in some cases you just can't get there.
Well, what's very intriguing about you is because of your faith life, you're very comfortable using that term, even in a scientific context, whereas, as I'm sure you know, many scientists would scoff if that kind of language was used even jokingly in a laboratory setting. But the reality of it is, if we're intellectually honest with ourselves and step back before and in the midst of any activity, I think we would say we're constantly putting a deep hope and trust, fides, trust, in whatever we're setting out to do. Now, the ideal would be to bring that not only to the material realm as we understand it, but to something much larger than ourselves that also chooses to become one of us, so that he, the animating life of all materiality itself, can direct us to greater love and greater degrees of compassion and empathy, which unfortunately we don't see actualized on our planet. That's why I do think if evolution proceeds the same way as it does on this planet, in our solar system, also on others, then we can hopefully see how those efforts of peace, justice, equality, etc., are being actualized on those other planets, and hopefully they've cracked a secret of God that we have yet to crack, and they can share those insights with us. And I really think that's it. I keep going back to that point of relationality, because the scriptures beginning with creation and ending with revelation really attest to what you said, Paul, that God is absolutely interior to creation and working with creation to make it more what it is, because it enters into deeper relatedness with each other and with God. And evolution, I think, even teaches us that on the lowest level of reality, that as physical forms of life unite, come together in greater degrees of complexity, understanding, reflection, consciousness rises in proportion to the level of that physical complexity. And so if God is the animating force in, with, under, and beyond that, then as we grow in complexity or greater degrees of relationship, we too are learning more about that very relatedness that's driving the process itself. You and I think, would be comfortable using the language God. So what do we do with that if that's also true on other planets? What about their understanding of God through their own process of complexity and relatedness can they share with us in order to bring us to a brighter, better tomorrow? I think that might be the greatest secret of the incarnation that we've yet to realize.
Yeah, that would introduce such a fascinating depth, right? To expand our understanding of the incarnation. That it's not just incarnation from the humans on the earth, right? Type perspective, and the meaning of redemption, right? Would these other forms of, I'll say intelligent life, right? They have that ability to reason, right? They have that ability to receive God's gift of free will. Okay. If there's just one other, civilization of life that's out there, extraterrestrial, or if there's millions of them, I would, would they have fallen too? Okay. There's part of me that would posit that, if given free will, probably. And so, if they didn't, wow, what a grace there of an entire civilization. They didn't eat the apple, or whatever the equivalent of that is. In that extraterrestrial civilization, but given the fact that we've been given that choice, I think that there's a probability that these other forms of life, they may have also taken that fall to say to God, we're going to try this on our own, okay, for a bit, and we're going to kind of push you off. We want to hide from you for a little bit and see what we can do on our own and see how this will go, and perhaps watch everything completely collapse on them, right? And so incarnation, maybe as I guess what the thought is Lucifer rebelled when he saw what the plan was for the incarnation, right? And I personally believe is that I don't see how any creature, any intelligent creature, given the gift of free will, would have not fallen, I suppose. I just have that sense that if the angels, if Lucifer, right, who's at a level of intelligence that's infinitely higher than ours, rejected, right, and said, no, we don't want to do this. I would suspect that myriads and perhaps millions of higher intelligent extraterrestrial life would have done the same thing.
And it's interesting, you made a couple of good points there, that can we find, you mentioned Lucifer, evil, darkness, can we find evidence of a shadow side to creation throughout the whole cosmological and biological process? I would say, yeah, one could safely say that the evolutionary process, even before it reached the level of the self-thinking human person, has been pretty fierce, aggressive, deadly. So there is that sense of a dark side to the process of life that probably would exist also on other planets. And then when we get to, again, presuming that they're humans, I mean, I don't think we could say they'd be humans like us, but with intelligence comparable to us and moral agency comparable to ours, I can't imagine what that would look like if after 13.8 billion years of cosmological and biological life, we haven't quite gotten the process correct yet, even though we've, at least as we understand, our species have only been around for 150 to 200,000 years. But that's the first point, which I think was very keen. The second point is, and this is a debate right now that's hotly discussed in astrotheological circles, that would other planets being in need of a planet hopping Jesus, that it would in other words, would the incarnation, not only as revelation, but also redemption on planet Earth, suffice for all other planets? Or can we argue for multiple incarnations? But you raised a good point. Would there even be a need? And would the cross even be possible? I mean, not necessarily possible, but even be necessary, considering that Jesus died based upon our political and cultural issues and a need for insurrection and rebellion, etc. So all of those historical and cultural circumstances that led to the death and crucifixion and death of Jesus were unique to us and our problems. But that might not be the case, as you mentioned, on other planets with other beings for a multitude of reasons. But I don't know. Do you think that this is a question, and I'm curious to know what your response would be. Do you think that the incarnation of Jesus here on planet Earth is sufficient to cover all other problems and on other planets?
At one level, I'm going to say that there's a part of me that says yes, from the perspective that we were talking earlier about, relationship, and there are some fundamental things that exist everywhere, and that accepting your very good point about Jesus' incarnation, in the fullness of time, right, came into a time of a specific culture and geopolitical reality, where yes, I mean, clearly it was for humans on Earth, but his incarnation was obviously it exists at that high level of being human, right? Of having human human intelligence and experiencing the world that existed in Roman times, okay, and in our world as a whole, okay, through all of time on Earth. But the incarnation also, from a physical perspective, was not just cells, but also molecules and atoms and quarks, right? Gravitational force, the strong and weak nuclear forces, is all part of the physical reality, right? And so Jesus's incarnation had to have encompassed that too, okay? And if that's the case, especially if we're talking about at that fundamental level of gravity and strong and weak nuclear forces, from what we see of the universe, that's throughout, right? The whole universe. So at least that piece of it, small piece, at least that piece of the incarnation would hold true, right? For these other civilizations, right?
That's an excellent and shrewd point, Paul. There's a 21st century theologian, Niels Henrik Gregerson, who used the language, coined the term deep incarnation, that the very activity of God entered into the biological tissue, the very structure of the cosmos itself, and then burst into the fullness of life in Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago, approximately, right? So your point is excellent, that if that's the case, one could argue that the very reality, the very existence of the cosmos itself is because it's the very body of God, making it alive, making it come to life. So yeah, nothing, I would agree with that. Nothing is devoid of or divorced from the incarnational reality of God. And I think that's a very important precept of the Catholic and Christian traditions that I would definitely want to see more work on. And it's wonderful. I'm really happy that you picked up on that.
Yeah, I think that there's, that concept of, God is creating this moment.
Yeah. Yes.
Everything in this moment, physically, but in time, right? But everything in this moment, the things that are immaterial, right? In this moment, he is also creating your thoughts, my thoughts, right? Sebastian's thoughts, everybody else's around the world's thoughts, right? A thought, and existence is God, right? From that perspective, this would exist without God, right? So, and so that includes, every moment, I can't remember where I read this, but every moment is like a recreation of creation. Every moment, and that includes the entire universe, right? And so therefore would include all these other potential civilizations, extraterrestrial civilizations that are out there every moment, even though we haven't encountered them yet, but yet they're being created by God, right? At that point. The two latest Mars rovers, Curiosity and Perseverance, that have been sent over the past decade. Perseverance has been the most recent one. Have been seeing increasingly more and more potential for evidence of water, okay, being on Mars. And they haven't found conclusive evidence of that, but there seems to be circumstantial evidence of that there was once, perhaps millions of years ago, water on Mars. Okay, and so potentially there was life on Mars at some point. To what extent and how complex, don't know. But here's what we do know: whatever that was is now gone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so therefore, life ended. Right? If that does truly point to that there was life on Mars at some point, that life is now gone. Okay, so what's the implication of that, right? I mean, so whether or not that life advanced, right, to intelligent life or not, the fact that life somehow got wiped out, okay, on Mars is an intriguing, right, theological question. Maybe it's a moral question. I don't know. It's gone. So maybe, going back to your question about the incarnation and, what's the extent of it, across the universe, maybe there was need for it on Mars, because all we see now is the remnants, potential. We don't know that for sure, but potential. There's remnants, perhaps, on Mars. So maybe, and maybe even if it was not at an advanced level, life ended for some reason.
Well, what's funny as you're talking, Paul, I'm thinking you only have to get in your car and drive down the street to get an experience of entropy. We're constantly wearing down. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to your point, we could certainly. I mean, those are universal principles. We can certainly, and we know that our universe is wearing down. Energy is being lost, but that's the beauty of faith, that the withinness of materiality, the soul, the spirit, consciousness, that which preserves our identity, that is able to escape the grips of entropy. Mm-hmm. That's what I find so beautiful. And, Scripture also would corroborate very nicely everything you just said, that Christ is Alpha and Omega, beginning and end of all things.
Right.
Regardless. So, and that was written in a geocentric universe. So imagine if we now really wanted to interpret that in a universe of Big Bang cosmology, which is very interesting. You're mentioning Mars and the fact that life most likely did exist at one point. Well, our universe, at least as the theories go, could have resulted from another universe, right? There's that multi-universe theory.
Right.
So we have so many questions that have yet to be sufficiently unpacked. And I honestly think, and this could be something that perhaps could also make for a good episode, is it because science and religion are not working in a more harmonious relationship that we have all this fragmentation and breakdown, unnecessary fragmentation and breakdown? That if they really are two ways of knowing the one world as comprehensively and as completely as possible, as the Jesuit scientist Teilhard de Chardin would remind us, are we only at times seeing with one half the human, one eye, thinking with one half the human brain, as we put these disciplines in silos, theology here, religion here, science, and they should be, they do work. Their enterprises are independent, right? The science takes care of the lower order observation and discovery. Theology takes care of the higher order. What is the meaning and purpose of these discoveries? Questions that science has no business answering, and nor do they want to. But when after they do their business independently, in order to give us a coherent worldview, they should be comparing notes as honestly, intellectually, responsibly as possible, and as spiritually mature as possible. So I'm hoping that with this conversation, and certainly others to come, people see the need to play their small part in making sure that happens. And Paul, you're doing that because you're taking your scientific awareness as well as your faith into the RCIA. So I think you're showing them, just by your own way of integrating these domains, that this is not only possible but imperative, and we all must do it.
Absolutely. I'll say that the vast majority of candidates that come through RCIA that I've encountered right through the past couple of decades, Obviously, they're all fruits of the society, that we live in, and so they come in with this whole set of this divorce, right, of the sense of science, right, from the sense of faith and theology and whatnot, and we try to paint that picture almost from the first sessions that we have with catechumens and candidates in RCIA is to try to paint a picture of what do we say, or what do we mean when we say that God created, okay, at the beginning, and then what is that creation, and to help introduce to them the sense that if we don't include the faith piece with this, if it's completely divorced, then all we have is just this purely scientific view. It's impoverished,
right?
Completely, right? It's similar to taking any branch of science and trying to separate it from the other branches of science, and that it's impoverished in that perspective as well, and so it's the whole understanding of all of reality, and the whole sense of the integrated reality, that's there. It's fused together at such a fundamental level that when we try to tear it apart at a higher level, right? Sometimes when you're cutting the chicken in the kitchen, and sometimes some of those strands are hard to separate, right? Well, I think we do that, when we say, well, there's no religion in this, right? Well, we got to be careful now, because now we've got gaps, and how do we account for that and explain it? And in some cases, people don't, and it's just ignored. And there are consequences to that because the gaps remain. And then people try to fill those gaps with something else. Okay, from all of the secular body of knowledge that's out there that will only go so far, obviously.
And science, two things about science, and I love science. I would never want to criticize it unfairly or unnecessarily, but wouldn't you even say that the best of science is merely approximating the truth? It can't possibly contain it.
No, it cannot, because as fundamentally, right, what science is, it starts with observation.
Right. That's right.
We have to observe, the physical universe. I'm a member of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, right? So I love what they do. For what they do is that they're observing, right? Now, it's not just sitting back and just watching. When you're observing, you're also trying to understand that, right? And then that's the key, because when you observe something like that, okay, in order to understand, we have to lay everything on the table, right? To be able to understand that. And the moment we start saying, well, we don't want to use chemistry today to understand, the full reality of what we're observing in the telescope today. Right? We just don't want to use chemistry today. I'm not in the mood to use chemistry today. Well, then how can we have a full view, right? From my perspective, that's what we're doing when we're excluding the entire world of philosophy and theology. It's just taking that a step further.
Yes.
So, in the more important sense.
And give you a really clear sentence about that. I mean, science can't teach wisdom, and we're in dire need of wisdom.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I fear, and I hope I can say this. Again, all we need to do is to turn on the TV to see that it's a reality. So I don't mind saying it, but I think that if we only rely on science as the arbiter of truth, and a final arbiter of truth at that, then we're going to be at a place in this country and world where we're not going to be able to bring us beyond any of the issues we face, not only intellectually, but wisdom that is knowledge deepened by love.
Mm-hmm.
I love Albert Einstein's famous quote. He was a scientist who had spiritual sensibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things we all need to be aware of, especially in science, is that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible.
Yes.
We're studying an infinite mystery, and he didn't even want to accept the implications of his theories, especially in quantum, which I think is very interesting. So
yes.
But to your point, yeah, these areas need to be integrated. They can't be separated or segregated from one another anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the recognition, the need for the recognition of that they this separation needs to be recognized as problematic. And that society has gotten to the point where they just assume that the separation is truth. Okay, and so people just march into the future. Okay, with a limited toolbox to navigate life and understand life as a result. And I guess now that I reflect on this, Robert, I maybe this is one of the reasons why this Apollo 8 story I think has so much power for today, because before that mission launched, okay, everything that went into it, at least from the observer's perspective, is that it was all about the science. It was all about the science. That's the whole reason they were doing this mission. Is the only reason that all the missions going to the moon were being done. Of course, there's from a historical perspective, as part of the Cold War, there's this struggle and competition, space race, between us and the Soviet Union. Yes, definitely, that's all part of it. Okay. But the means by which we're going to get there were all based on scientific principles, engineering principles. How are we going to get to the moon? Okay, we're going to sharpen our pencils and do a bunch of number crunching and do a lot of analyses and design things called rockets and spacecraft and we're going to get there. And I just love, and I don't want to spoil the whole talk, but I just love how in the midst of all that, yes, it's a scientific mission. Yes, it's also geopolitical, competition as well. That God just comes into the middle of that whole mission, and in a way just explodes the perception that I'll say most people have or still have today in terms of who we are, what's important, and how we live our lives, and just completely opened the aperture to the fact that, whoa, there's some bigger questions here that we didn't intend to try to answer, but now we're asking them because we're encountering it on this mission. And as a result of that, the billions of people who are watching this mission on TV at the time, which up to that point was the largest television audience in history, found themselves, their hearts were grabbed, okay, by things that happened on this mission. and not grab from the perspective of, oh, well, this is really cool, they're on this really cool rocket, and stuff like. No, deeper things were grabbing at them, that you don't have to go to the moon to have these feelings, but yet somehow, okay, this mission really reached into people's hearts like that. So as a result, when this mission ended, things had changed, okay, and the enough people's perceptions had changed, and people started thinking about things that they hadn't thought about as a result of this mission. That, hey, if God can use a mission, okay, that was born out of a Cold War struggle, okay, an arms race between two nuclear powers, okay, and leveraging the best possible science to in the competition to try to beat the other guy, okay, to this objective, and in the middle of all that, suddenly dump onto the world these more fundamental questions. Wow. So I guess one hope that I have is that it happened. Okay, when this mission took place in 1968, who knows how God is going to use something else? Okay, that on the surface appears to be a purely scientific, technical type thing. Okay, and as a result of that, out of it explodes, this whole set of questions of, wow, what does this really mean for me, for us, for the world, for humanity, for life? What's it really mean for that? And it could be, maybe next month the Perseverance rover discovers something, maybe a fossil or something that's on Mars that says, okay, well, undeniably, this is not it's not a rock, it's not a mineral, it's something. It appears to be some sort of biological kind of thing that will probably explode, right, on the world stage, and all kinds of discussion and speculation, and some people it may threaten their beliefs, other people it may deepen their beliefs. They'll be on all kinds of talk shows and discussions, and that's what Apollo 8 did, in a different kind of way, but it did back then. It did that, and I think we're probably ripe for something like that.
Well, you're saying something that I certainly believe in and hope for. I mean, if God's job description, as you were mentioning, is to take life and make more life out of it, then that's exactly what these discoveries do. And as you were saying, even in the midst of a historical circumstance that was unfavorable, we grew in deep existential meaning. So life transitions to new phases of life. And if God is the explosive power of life itself, then that can't be contained. It's only going to shoot up in new ways. And as the great philosopher Henri Bergson once said, grass always grows through the cement, no matter how many times you cut it down. So even if we get caught up in disbelief or scientism of the worst kind, there's something that's always going to be making its way through those hardened circumstances. But awareness is the way to bring it into fuller being. And I think that's what maybe it takes, these monumental moments of discovery to wake us up as a population, because maybe as individuals, maybe the age of individualism is really over. Maybe difference can't come from just individual circumstances or individual realizations of insight. Maybe we need, as you mentioned, billions of people to be awed at once and to be brought into a transformation at once. And those are the God moments, right? They're always big.
Yeah.
Always
right.
big.
Right. Yeah. When they happen, there's a power to that when it's that many people who experience it at the same time. Right. Now, of course, not every single person is going to experience something deep and transforming, but a big chunk will. And when you're talking about billions of people, that's still a lot of people.
And imagine, we live in a deeply interconnected world, and as an interconnected, not only globe or universe, but an interconnected humanity, all gazing upon the same literally earth-shattering reality. Who knows what that's doing to our inwardness, our psyches, and one would hope that it really gets us to re-examine what we're all about. When you said that, I started to think, yes, I do think it gets us to rethink and reconceive who we are in the vastness of space-time mattering. But at the same time, have we shown that we've thought deeply about these things? That's the concern I would have.
It's part of the challenge, right? Because when there's the flash of the moment, right? When it happens, and it can't strike people deeply when it happens. But in a lot of cases, then the moment's over, right? and then people get sucked into, quote, the regular lives and the stresses and whatever, of regular life, and that deep moment has passed, unfortunately, right? That's why for people of faith, it's important, right? They have that good prayer life, right? So you're that past moment isn't past, right? That you're always seeking to reach into that depth, right? Into the depth of spirituality, to the depth of your heart, so that you can encounter the Lord. But for many people, they'll have that big moment, and they don't have that opportunity because maybe they don't have that, in their life, and so therefore it passes. So maybe that's why God does this every so often, right? Where there's some massive moment, or where there's it may not necessarily be a scientific, type of thing, but sometimes it's out of nature. Big events happen, right? Desjardins was a paleontologist, right? Wasn't he a dinosaur guy, right? So I mean, obviously that whole world doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And maybe this is one of my great hopes for your talk, Paul, and I hope it happens, that there's nothing, and I hope you make this clear, I'm sure you will, that there really is nothing mundane or ordinary about our lives at all.
Mm-hmm.
We have only to be attentive to what's in front of us, to allow the miraculous to come into full, powerful sight. And I don't know, I mean, even the most atheistic or agnostic among us, I don't know how we can go to bed at night and not wonder, well, what is the restlessness of life about? And grand moments like Apollo 8 and those thereafter remind us, I think, of restlessness is because life is seeking to transcend itself. And who am I right now in this position? And how can this new discovery give new meaning to my restlessness and show me very clearly that it's not redundant, and it's actually driving me to do some kind of good. That seems to be a theme of our conversation, that goodness leads to greater relationship. And maybe that's true. Maybe restlessness, it's the RR. Restlessness leads to relationship, and relationship leads back to restlessness because it constantly seeks further relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Moments remind us of that.
They do. They do. I think the restlessness, because of relationships, the restlessness will be there. But when those moments come, that's also a call, right? It's a call from God to pay attention, right, to the relationship, because so often we get distracted, right? We're so into the moment of what we're doing, right? And a lot of times, and not that what we're doing is not important, right? But a lot of times what we're doing is at a level, right, where it's not at that deep heart level. It's at, hey, I'm doing this thing at work, or I'm trying to solve this problem, or whatever happens to be. And if you just have those repeating itself hour after hour, day after day, and don't allow time, for that deeper reflection, that will probably only drive deeper restlessness and more restlessness. And sometimes God allows that to happen, right, to people, so that you start reaching for, wait a minute, what's the right answer? Okay, well, maybe now you're starting to ask the right questions now. Okay, let's see where we can take that, because otherwise, people will get trapped, in that sense of, all I'm going to think about and focus on is just what's visible to me, right, and what's physical, until something happens, right? Something, maybe it's an accident or something like that, or maybe something really good, that happens as well, birth of a child, or whatever happens to be. All right, here's an opportunity, right, for that grace to hopefully be noticed, in those kinds of situations. The world that we live in, with its technology, whether it's technology to go to the moon or it's technology on our phones, right? Sometimes it can be a distraction to us, and sometimes people just get lost in those distractions. And I think having these kinds of conversations are very important, to see that it's very easy to not even care about it if we only stay at this kind of superficial level, right, of going from day to day. But if we are touching the bigger questions from time to time, right, and trying to touch, where am I really going? Mm-hmm. And if I need to understand that, maybe I should understand where I really came from. What am I? Those kinds of things. If I maybe start take a little time to investigate that, wow, well, maybe I might discover something really important, and maybe just completely stumble into the truth by checking something like that out. And that's what I would hope. I'm hoping that this whole Apollo 8 story, would hopefully be spread, and hopefully others would encounter it and maybe start asking themselves some of these kinds of questions.
Yeah, and how can we grow, right? And
yes.
I was thinking about this as you were talking, and this kind of recapitulates our entire conversation, that God is love, love is relatedness, and when we love one another, we're always seeking to grow that relatedness. We love, mm-hmm. We love one another in all our giftedness, our faults, our joys, our struggles. We love the whole person. That's not a question. It shouldn't be. But we always love what that person can become in order to be the best of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you were mentioning in terms of the development of technology and the being distracted by the constant use of our technology is a way to re-enchant a world that has gone flat. And a world that is inherently related, but has lost its sense of how to grow relationship. And it goes back to your wonderful point again, Paul. The Apollo 8 mission, I think, has a way of re-enchanting us in a good way that the distractions of technology and others don't do or can't possibly do, at least not at present. So we're really trying to contextualize this in the hopes that watchers, listeners, take heed to the greater story, the greater divine story.
Absolutely. God, throughout all of salvation history, has been constantly reaching out, constantly, right? And how many times have we seen in salvation history where that reaching out isn't understood, isn't seen, is ignored, is pushed away, but yet God still does that, right? And it happened, as salvation history continues, right? It happened in Scripture. It's happened in the history and in the life of the church, right? and continues and will continue, right, into the future. And I think to some of the important points that you've made, that as that future unfolds, okay, we may get to that point where we start encountering, okay, there are other beings out there, perhaps, right? And voila, okay, so providentially, God has now opened the door, at that point, right? And again, okay, how do we then, okay, engage with that? Okay, how do we take a look at this as whatever that life happens to be? Do we accept the invitation for relationship and engagement, or do we interpret it as a threat? Right? Again, as we look throughout history, throughout salvation history, it sometimes has been interpreted as we want to reach out to these people. Other times it's been interpreted, we don't want anything to do with these people. We need to put up the defenses and protect ourselves. And so, we need to really discern that call, right? And understand ourselves, right? As a result of a discovery like that, and deeply understand ourselves so that we can then, right, engage in a good way.
And as Catholic Christians, we're charged with a moral responsibility to do so. And I mean, simply the Scripture tells us we're to engage and welcome the widow, the foreigner, the stranger. Well, extraterrestrial intelligent life presumably is the greatest stranger of all. So we would need to welcome them. And really, I don't mean to be too glib about this, but welcome them at the table for a barbecue, right?
Yes.
Real conversation, because if we're really doing the work of Christ, we're doing the work of welcoming, to use your language, inviting. And one of my favorite spiritual theologians is Ronald Rolheiser. And he said, listen, the reality is, if you can't sit at a table with not only your worst enemy, but a stranger, you really aren't fit for the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And
that is so true.
It really is. I believe. So the same thing applies here. We have a responsibility as Christians to be not only seeking for that life, but to be welcoming that life and hopefully together transforming and transcending life as we know it.
Absolutely. When that time comes,
Right.
If and when that time comes. And that happens, okay, that discovery is made, okay, however it happens. God's calling us, right, in that particular situation. It's happened at that moment. It didn't happen before that, right? It happened then, okay? That's the way that God unfolded it. To wait until that moment. Again, once again, another way to look at the fullness of time, but from that perspective, right? And so if we recognize, hopefully, as Christians, right, from a Christian perspective, if we look at it that way, okay, God has opened up this opportunity for us. Well, then we need to respond as other Christs, right, in that particular situation. And if we do respond as other Christs, well, then it's not going to be this, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to get all defensive about, because this is a completely unknown form of life, and we need to boost the defense budget and do all this other kind of stuff. Instead, if we respond as other Christ, then we say, okay, I'm called to engage and called to reach out.
Yeah. And what's interesting, I don't want to go too far off topic here, but it's really not a tangent. I think it's very applicable to what you're saying. When this COVID crisis began to mitigate more and more, one of my great fears is we're always going to have people wandering around, even fully vaccinated persons wandering around, still squeamish about getting too close or getting too connected. And we do have folks like that, even amongst perhaps even in our workplaces. So we need people even here on Earth in our own species trying to reestablish healthy connection, and that's not even happening. So the point that this is making is we need to get ourselves more connected, and any way, any opportunity that can bring us to that realization and the execution of that connectedness, we have at it. And Paul, I really hope you're going to do that. The more we're talking, the more I'm thinking, darn it, I really wish I had availability to do this with you on April 22nd, to work beside you for this webinar.
Well, perhaps the Lord will provide another opportunity.
That's right. Yeah, we'll re-enchant this whole business again. But as we're talking, I'm realizing this was a lovely conversation, and we've given Sebastian almost an hour and 40 minutes of content.
Wow.
It's much long. I stayed past the time I needed to stay, but this was so enriching for me, and I really enjoyed meeting you. And I wanted to make sure that this was definitely something that was going to promote you well. So I hope that happens.
Well, Robert, I think the answer to that question is yes. And it's been a joy to meet you, Robert, and I have immensely enjoyed this conversation. I mean, this kind of stuff, I can just talk all night type of thing, but I sure do appreciate your time this evening to kind of talk through some of these beautiful thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. And likewise, it was wonderful to meet you, and hopefully we can stay in touch, and who knows, our paths on this kind of thing may cross again.
Yeah, I hope so. God willing.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.